Hi there. The invisible contract, why empires die from the inside out, the psychology of a dying dollar. Look at the $20 bill in your wallet. Right now, it's just a piece of paper. But history says that very soon, it could be worth less than the ink printed on it. Most Americans think money is like gravity, it just exists. But in reality, your life savings is built on a lie. It's called the invisible contract, and for the first time in 100 years, that contract is being torn to pieces. Here is why the dollar's date with destiny is closer than you think. Before we dive into the wreckage of history or the sirens screaming in today's economy, I want you to do something that feels incredibly simple, yet strangely gut-wrenching. I want you to pause. Look at your money, not as a symbol of your hard work and not as a tool for your weekend plans. Look at it literally. Look at the balance on your smartphone screen. Look at that $20 or $100 bill sitting in your wallet. Look at those digits you are trusting with your retirement, your children's education, and your very survival. Now, ask yourself one quiet, haunting question. Why do you believe this has value? I'm not asking what the government says backs it. I'm not asking what your economics professor told you. I'm asking why you, in your gut, believe that a piece of paper or a digital pixel can be traded for a gallon of gas or a loaf of bread. Most Americans have never asked that question. We've been conditioned to think money is like oxygen, it's just there. It's stable by default. It's a law of nature. History, however, is a brutal teacher, and history says otherwise. Money isn't a natural force. It's a shared illusion. It's the most successful collective lie ever told. It only works because of an invisible contract. You accept it because you trust that the guy at the grocery store will accept it tomorrow. He accepts it because he trusts the government won't print it into oblivion. But what happens when that trust starts to rot? Here is the pattern that has repeated for 2,500 years. And it's a pattern we are currently living through. Empires don't collapse because of foreign invaders. They collapse because their money dies first. Rome didn't fall because the Visigoths were smarter. It fell because its currency became a joke. The British Empire didn't shrink because they forgot how to sail. It shrunk because the pound sterling lost its soul. In America thinks it's the exception. Every empire thinks it's the exception. Right up until the moment the contract is torn to pieces. Red flag 1. The alchemists and the slow poison. Every currency death begins with a seduction. A promise from the elites that they found a way to create something from nothing. The Roman blueprint, more than just clipping. We all hear about the Roman Empire's debasement, but we rarely talk about the psychology of it. Imagine you're a Roman soldier in 211 AD. You're paid in denarii, pure silver. But the emperor has a problem. He's promised the public free bread and expensive gladiator games he can't afford. He doesn't want to raise taxes that causes riots. So, he plays the alchemist. He melts the silver and mixes it with copper. At first, it's 95% silver. Nobody notices. Then it's 80%. Then 50%. By the time of the crisis of the 3rd century, the denarius was basically a copper coin dipped in a thin wash of silver. It looked the same, but it was a lie. The result, farmers stopped bringing grain to the cities because they didn't want the fake coins. The government responded with price controls and more printing. Rome didn't collapse in a day. It adjusted to its own decay until the money was so worthless that the central government couldn't even pay the soldiers to guard the borders. That is how collapse hides it, masks itself as the new normal. The Song Dynasty's paper goes centuries before the West. China invented paper money. It was a miracle. No more heavy chests of copper coins. But then came the wars. To fund the military, the Song, and later the Yuan dynasty, did exactly what the Federal Reserve did in 2020. They hit the print button. They thought paper was magic. But by the time the Ming dynasty took over, the inflation was so high that a single sheet of paper money couldn't buy the ink used to print it. The people didn't just get mad, they detached. They went back to bartering and silver. They realized that paper backed by authority is only as strong as that authority's self-control. And governments have never shown self-control when they have a printing press. Red flag to the exorbitant privilege trap. This is the one that hits home for the US and the UK. When your currency is the global reserve, you feel like a god. But history shows that this status is actually a gilded cage. The British pound's long goodbye for 100 years. The British pound sterling was the dollar of the world. If you wanted to trade silk from India or tea from China, you needed pounds. The British felt invincible. They borrowed and spent, thinking the world would always demand their currency. Then came the massive debts of the world wars. Britain tried to maintain the image of the pound's strength, but the math didn't add up. Inflation crept in. By the 1940s, the world looked at Britain's debt-to-GDP ratio and whispered, they can't pay this back. In 1944, at Bretton Woods, the pound was officially dethroned by the US dollar. Britain didn't disappear, but the standard of living for the average Brit plummeted. They went from being the masters of the world to a nation of austerity and rationing. Reserve status doesn't protect you from a collapse. It just makes the fall much, much longer. Spain. The curse of too much money in the 1500s. Spain was the richest nation on earth. They were flooding Europe with silver from the New World. They thought they were rich, but they were actually destroying themselves. Because they had so much money, they stopped producing things. Why build a factory or farm when you can just buy everything with silver? Prices in Spain skyrocketed. The price revolution. Eventually, Spanish Spanish goods became too expensive for anyone to buy. The money stayed, but the economy died. Spain went bankrupt multiple times while literally sitting on piles of silver. This is the warning for America. Having the world's money doesn't make you productive. Often, it makes you lazy and fragile. Red flag 3. The grandeur before the ghosts. When the money starts to rot, the image of wealth becomes a frantic obsession. It's called the late-stage luxury phase. France and the Versailles illusion. If you look at France right before the revolution, it looked glorious. The Palace of Versailles was dripping in gold. The aristocracy was throwing the most expensive parties in history. But look closer. The government was insolvent. They were drowning in debt from helping the American Revolution, ironically, and maintaining their empire. While the numbers at the top looked great, the cost of a loaf of bread for a commoner went from a few sous to a week's wages. The gold on the walls of Versailles was a mask for the emptiness of the treasury. The louder the illusion, the closer the truth is to screaming. The 1920s American sky-high ego. Right before the Great Depression, America was obsessed with bigness. Skyscrapers like the Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building were rising. Everyone was rich on paper because of margin debt. People were buying radios and cars on credit for the first time. It felt like a new era where poverty was abolished, but the money was detached from labor. It was all speculation. When the invisible contract finally snapped in 1929, it wasn't just a market crash, it was a realization that the last 10 years of wealth were actually just a giant debt-fueled hallucination. We've looked at the history. We've seen how Rome diluted its soul, how China chased the paper ghost, and how Britain lost its crown. But this isn't just a history lesson. This is a mirror. The final detachment. The dollar's date with destiny. The silence before the storm. There is a specific moment in every monetary collapse that the history books usually gloss over. It's not the riot in the streets or the burning of the bank. It's the moment people stop arguing about the number. Not because the numbers got better, but because the numbers stopped mattering. This is the phase where nothing explodes, yet everything ends. People just stop believing. You see, a currency doesn't die when it hits zero on a chart. It dies when the collective psyche of the people shifts from saving for the future to surviving the week. And if you look closely at the American landscape today, that shift isn't just coming. It's already here. Red flag for desperate taxation and the complexity trap. When a government realizes their money is failing, they don't hold a press conference and apologize. They don't cut spending. They do the opposite. They squeeze, but they do it in ways that are meant to confuse you. The French assignat disaster. A lesson enforced during the French Revolution. The government issued assignats, paper money, supposedly backed by land. When they printed too much and the value plummeted, did they stop? No. They passed the law of the maximum. They set price controls. They told shopkeepers, you must sell your goods at this price or we will execute you. What happened? The shops went empty. A black market emerged overnight. The government then tried to tax the hoarders. Every step was a more desperate attempt to control a reality that was already gone. They tried to legislate value into a piece of paper, and all they got was a guillotine. The modern camouflage look at the US and the UK today. We don't have law of the maximum yet, but we have something more subtle. Inflation as a hidden tax. Think about this. If the government taxes you at 30%, you're mad. But if they print money, causing your $100 to only buy $70 worth of goods, they've essentially taken that 30% without ever asking for your vote. It's a compliance-free tax. They layer the system with so much complexity, hidden fees, temporary surcharges, 2,000-page tax codes that the average American can't even tell how much of their life is being siphoned away. Complexity is not accidental. It is camouflage. When a system becomes too complex for a citizen to understand, it's because the system is no longer working for the citizen. It is working on the citizen. Red flag 5. The punishment of the saver. This is the most dangerous stage. This is where the invisible contract is officially set on fire. In a healthy society, you work, you save, and your delay of gratification is rewarded. In a dying currency, that logic is flipped on its head. The Weimar Nightmare, 1923, in Germany. During the hyperinflation, the responsible people, the ones who saved their money, the ones who were frugal, were the ones who ended up eating out of trash cans. Meanwhile, the speculators, the ones who went into massive debt to buy hard assets, became the new kings. This flips the morality of a nation. Why be honest? Why work hard? Why plan for 10 years from now when your money won't last 10 months? The American cultural tell. Look at our culture right now. Speculation over skill. Meme stocks over long-term investing. The obsession with side hustles just to keep your head above water. This isn't just a social trend. It is an economic signal distortion. When the money lies, the truth dies. People stop building for the long term. They stop having children because they can't afford the future. They stop investing in their communities. They enter a state of hyperpresentism where the only thing that matters is the next 24 hours. When a society loses its ability to look at the future, it has already lost its future. The Nixon shock and the petrodollar illusion in 1971, the world changed forever. President Nixon temporarily suspended the dollar's convertibility into gold. That temporary measure is now 54 years old. We moved from a system backed by a physical reality gold to a system backed by faith and credit. For decades, that faith was held up by the petrodollar, the agreement that the world would buy oil only in dollars. This gave us a cheat code. We could print money, buy real goods from the rest of the world, and they would just hold our paper. But look at the headlines in 2024 and 2025. The BRICS nations Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and others are openly moving away from the dollar. They are tired of holding the bag for America's $34 trillion debt. If the world decides they don't need the dollar to buy oil, all those trillions of greenbacks currently sitting in foreign banks will come home, and when they do, they will hit our domestic economy like a tsunami. The exorbitant privilege is expiring, and most Americans are still checking their 401 kiloseconds like nothing has changed. The final stage, detachment. The last stage of currency death is not anger, it's detachment. It's when you see a headline about inflation cooling and you just laugh because you just paid $9 for a dozen eggs. It's when you see the national debt clock spinning and it feels like a video game score rather than a real number. Rome experienced it. The Soviet Union experienced it. Every collapsing order reaches a point where the people comply, but they no longer believe. They stop participating in the invisible contract and start looking for the exits. Whether it's gold, land, or decentralized assets, people are quietly voting no on the dollar with their actions. This is not a prediction of a doomsday movie. This is a pattern recognized by every historian who has ever lived. The dollar is the most powerful tool ever created, but it is not a god. It is a contract. Ask yourself quietly, honestly, and without the noise of politics, is that contract stronger today than it was 10 years ago? Do you trust the management of that contract more today than you did yesterday? History doesn't punish those who are wrong. It punishes those who are certain that it can't happen to them. The greenback isn't a permanent fixture of the universe. It's a chapter in a book that is currently being turned. The question isn't whether the dollar will face its reckoning. The question is, when the ink finally disappears from the contract, what will you be holding? Because the end of the illusion is never announced. It is simply realized. History doesn't reward the loudest voice. It rewards the one who sees the pattern before everyone else does. If this deep dive made you look at that dollar bill a little differently today, do me a favor, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that this isn't just noise. It's a conversation that actually matters. We're tracking the cracks in the invisible contract every week. If you want to stay ahead of the curve and understand the forces shaping your future before they hit your bank account, hit subscribe and turn on those notifications. But more importantly, I want to hear from you. Look at the world around you. Do you feel the contract is holding, or do you see the red flags in your own city? Drop a comment below. I read as many as I can, and the best insights usually come from you guys. Stay sharp, stay awake, and I'll see you in the next one.